This is Lama Kathy Wesley of the Columbus Karma Tiksum Choling Tibetan Buddhist Meditation Center of Columbus, Ohio. And thanks for joining us today for our Sunday 11:30 a.m. Dharma Talk series. Today, I wanted to talk about the question of how we change our minds and the various tools we can use to change our minds from confusion to wisdom. If we look at the entire teachings of the Buddha, they're about this journey that we make as individuals from a state of confusion to a state of wisdom. And if we think about all of the teachings of the Buddha, from his Four Noble Truths, that suffering's part of life, that suffering has a cause, that suffering has a solution, and that there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. If we look at the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, his Four Noble Truths are saying we have the capacity as human beings to transform our minds and our experience of the world. The Buddha said that suffering and happiness happen in the mind, and that means that the causes of suffering, while they may appear to be external, are actually internal in nature. And therefore, when we look at the cause of suffering, the Buddha said the main cause of suffering is internal in our own mind, our grasping and clinging. By holding on to things so tightly, we cause ourselves so much pain and suffering. And the thing that we hold on to the most is our sense of self, me or I. And so all of the rest of the path that he taught, the path of understanding the cause of suffering as clinging, and then understanding the cause of the end of suffering being relinquishing, clinging, letting go, and then the path being the path that shows us how to let go of grasping and clinging, particularly to self. And so my talk today is going to be about that path from confusion to clarity, from confusion to wisdom, and about how we can take that path one step after another, going from confusion to wisdom. So I'm going to start with a short Buddhist prayer. And this is a prayer of taking refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha from now until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. So this gives us a good start for our practice and study today. We might look at examples of the great masters of Buddhism, including His Holiness the Jawan Karmapa, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and others, and we might think about the examples that these masters show us in their lives. They're able to be patient in all situations. They're able to take obstacles that arise in their lives as the path to awakening. And this is not necessarily something that we can do as individuals right now, but we do admire their capacity for being able to do this. And so when we look at them and we think about what is it that makes these masters so peaceful, so serene, and yet so wise, and so deeply understanding of the human condition, what makes that happen? And I think one of the reasons is that these masters have spent days, weeks, months, years, decades saturating their minds with goodness, saturating their minds with the causes of happiness, and turning away from the causes of suffering. If you remember from what we talked about a minute ago about the Four Noble Truths, when the Buddha said that suffering is caused by grasping and clinging, this meant that the solution to that is to let go of grasping and clinging. But it's so difficult to do because grasping and clinging is how we've lived our entire lives up to now. We've needed to accumulate possessions. We've needed to accumulate resources. We've needed to accumulate friends, allies, helpers along the path. And so we've needed to do all of those things. And as such, we've had the opportunity to build a life for ourselves. But we've had to build this life for ourselves by grasping and clinging, and by bringing about the presence of all of these things in our lives that we've needed. But the Buddha said that anything that we grasp to and cling to does eventually come to an end, because all things are impermanent. And since everything is impermanent, this means that that those things that we grasp to and cling to that are external to ourselves will someday change. And as those things change, then if our happiness relies upon them, then our happiness will come to an end. So the Buddha said, instead of trying to accumulate external things as a way of creating our wealth, instead, what we could do is accumulate mind states, create states within our mind that are peaceful, relaxed, loving, kind, and expansive. And so the Buddha, in his fourth noble truth, taught not just the Eightfold Noble Path, but the four statements that summarize the Eightfold Noble Path. Do no harm whatsoever, practice virtue as much as you can, and tame your mind. This, and only this, is the teaching of the Buddha. So because that last one is just a summary, we can then look at the other three basic teachings of the Buddha. Do no harm, don't harm yourself, don't harm others, practice virtue, take care of yourself and benefit others, and tame your mind. And so in that way, we can talk about how to rest our minds in such a way that we become aware and know what's going on in our minds. So if we look at the examples of these great masters and then look at ourselves and say, they are amazing, us not so much, how do we begin to emulate those great masters? And we do it by training our own mind with the causes of happiness. We do our best not to hurt ourselves and not to hurt others. We do our best to practice the virtuous activities of preserving life, being truthful, being generous and kind, and so on, and holding no ill will against any person, and so on. If we can practice these things, then our minds will be more at peace and more at rest. But the Buddha didn't just teach positive activity. The Buddha actually also taught that we could tame our minds. And so in teaching us how to tame our minds, he taught us the practice of quiet sitting meditation, which in Sanskrit is called shamatha, and in Tibetan is called shine. So when we practice shamatha, shine, or tranquility meditation, what we do is we bring our attention to rest on the breath as it comes in and goes out. And by allowing our attention to rest on the breath, we let go of the thoughts and difficult perceptions and emotions and habits. We let go of those things as they manifest in our mind, leaving our attention and the breath as being central. And when we do this very simple practice of being aware of the breath and letting go of distraction, we create a new way of relating to our thoughts. Our thoughts are not, they don't become oppressive. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I think I have in my life. Sometimes when we worry about something, we kind of get possessed by that worry and we can't forget about it, or we think we can't forget about it, or we feel guilty if we forget about it. But if we practice shamatha meditation, and when thoughts come through our mind, if we allow them to go or notice them, label them thinking, and let them go, returning our attention then to the breath. That touching the thought, letting it go, and then returning attention allows us to become aware of the thoughts that are going on in our mind. And this is very beneficial because it allows us to begin to see the mechanism for happiness and the mechanism for suffering. Grasping on to harmful things causes suffering. Grasping onto positive things can also cause suffering, but if we learn how to let go of clinging and we learn how to be content with what we have, and to be at peace with ourselves and those around us, then we really have something that is a cause of happiness for us. So you could say that shamatha gives us the power to know the state of our own mind. It gives us the power to know the state of our own mind and to see how what we entertain in our minds translates into how we feel and how we experience the world. And once we notice that this is how the mind works, we can begin to direct our mind by thinking about specific things, by placing specific things into the mix of our everyday thoughts. And one of the things that we can place in the mix of our everyday thoughts is the practice of love and compassion. Love and compassion are powerful forces that if we think about, they have the power to transform suffering into happiness. We can think about in our own lives when we were angry and resentful or jealous or all of these different kinds of difficult feelings. When we felt like this, we were grasping onto ourselves and thinking, oh, woe is me, and how terrible is the world, and so on. But if we notice that grasping and can loosen it even just a little bit, we can begin to practice some love toward ourselves and practice being able to let go. The other thing that we can use love and compassion for is to help us in our relationships with others. Because sometimes when we hold grudges or we feel resentful, it harms our ability to clearly hear and relate to other people. But if we can practice learning how to let go of judgmental thoughts and learn how to let go of these types of things, and instead to affirm and to create feelings of love toward others by training in love in this way, we can actually accomplish a lot. And we can actually transform suffering into happiness. And so one of the main meditation practices for that, which we teach at our Dharma Center, besides the shamatha practice, we also can practice something called Tonglen, Tonglen, Tonglen. It's using our imagination to take our naturally occurring love and compassion and change that naturally occurring love and compassion into, I guess you could say, a wall-to-wall experience of love. Here's how it works. You sit on your meditation seat, you close your eyes, and you imagine that all of the beings in the universe are present in front of you. You think about them all being there. And then as you breathe out, you think that your breath becomes goodness and it goes to all of those beings and it makes them happy. And then when you breathe in, you think that all of their suffering leaves their bodies. You use your imagination, and you imagine that all their suffering leaves them and it comes right to you. And as it comes into you, it meets the love, the naturally occurring love, compassion, and bodhisattva intention in your heart. And all of that suffering dissolves into nothing and disappears. My teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, he said that when you do this practice and all of that suffering comes to you, you can use your imagination by thinking of it like a little pile of dust that a breeze comes and blows away. And he said, this is because the power of your love, the power of your compassion, your naturally occurring love and compassion, which we as Buddhists associate with our Buddha nature, our capacity to awaken and become Buddhas ourselves. This love and compassion that is the evidence and manifestation of our Buddha nature, this love and compassion overcomes all of the suffering that we imagine that we take on, and it dissolves it into nothing and disappears. And in this way, we can, with each out-breath, train in love, which is the wish for others to be happy. And on the in-breath, we think that we remove their suffering, and that is practicing compassion. Love, giving happiness on the out-breath, compassion, removing suffering on the in-breath. And so these two practices, shamatha and tonglen, allow us first, through shamatha, to understand what's on our mind and how our thoughts contribute to our overall sense of being. And then tonglen, we begin to change and transform our thoughts from being selfish to being selfless. And in that way, we can actually begin to make better choices in our lives. At first, we're just as confused as we always have been, but at least we have the capacity to tame our thoughts for a few minutes every day in meditation. And perhaps we have a little bit of a chance to, with our imagination, expand our love and compassion through tonglen. But there's more. We don't have to stop just there. When we do the practice of tonglen, when we do the practice of shamatha, we gain control over our minds and the capacity to do more with them. But what else can we do with them? How else can we expand our minds and expand our capacity to help others? We can do this by practicing virtue. And before we go further, I know a lot of people associate the word virtue with those examples in movies of people who are overly pious, overly religious, and perhaps maybe a little stuck up, and they may think that they're great and they'll become a little bit arrogant. So a lot of people associate virtue with the holier than thou feeling that one gets when one watches movies and television programs about individuals who think they're better than other people. This is not what the Buddha intended when he said that we should train in virtue. What he means by that is we should train in not harming others, and we should train in benefiting them instead. And so these practices that I'm going to talk about starting today, I don't know if this will be a two-parter or a three-parter, but we'll see how it goes. This question of how to accumulate virtue, a virtuous mind state, how to work on and develop and cultivate a virtuous mind state. This actually is something that begins to dissolve our arrogance. So if a person practices virtue and they become more arrogant, they're going in the wrong direction and they need to take corrective action. So if awareness allows us to change our thoughts, and the practice of love and compassion helps us to train and change our intention, then if you put the two together, you're going to have the capacity to accumulate virtue. So there is actually methodology involved in this, as in anything in Buddhism. As those of you who know about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path and all of this, you will be delighted to know that there is something called the 7 branches. And these 7 branches are part of Buddhist prayer and have been part of Buddhist prayer since the beginning of Buddha's enlightenment and the beginning of the Buddha's teachings. The 7 branches have been taught as a way of consciously cultivating virtue within the individual. And you could say that they're part of Buddhist prayer, which is a whole nother topic, because when I talk about Buddhist prayer, people say, now, wait a minute, I thought Buddhism was a non-theistic religion. So who are we praying to and why? So although Buddhism is a non-theistic tradition, meaning that the Buddha didn't teach about God, and the Buddha didn't teach us how to relate to God. He said, my teaching is more about how to bring an end to suffering. He used the example of a person shot by an arrow. He said, if I'm shot by an arrow, he said, I'm not going to be thinking about the woman who was the mother of the person who shot me. He said, I'm going to be pulling out the arrow and ending suffering. So he said, my teaching is about the methods to end suffering and nothing more. And so he didn't address what we might call theology, which is the study of God. He didn't talk about that at all. Instead, he talked about how individuals create their own suffering and how they can bring an end to their own suffering through quiet meditation, through love and compassion, and through developing and cultivating a virtuous mind. So this brings us back to the 7 branches. The 7 branches, those of you who have heard me teach before know that I have several books that I like to teach out of. And one of them is this book, The Great Path of Awakening by Jamgon Khantrul. And this book, the Great Path of Awakening, is based on the Mahayana Sutras of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha on the Mahayana. And it's full of various types of advice. In this book, he talks about the 7 branches of offering, and he says that in the book he says that by practicing these, we can develop our virtue within our own hearts and minds. And in the footnote, the translator Ken MacLeod explains the 7 branch prayer. This is footnote number 54. Those of you who are following along in the book. He says it's a traditional format for Mahayana practice. The first of the 7 branches is paying homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So he's starting by explaining that we are actually interrelating to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It is prayer. We're actually using a prayer to relate to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I asked Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche one time, well, what's the difference between Buddhist prayer and theistic prayer? And he said, in theistic prayer, you're praying to someone. He said, first of all, I'm not sure I understand theistic prayer completely, because he said, I never learned anything about it. He said, but I think that in a theistic prayer situation, you're praying to someone who has never been like you and who you can never be like. And you're asking for them to make changes in the phenomenal world to be of benefit to you. Whereas in Buddhism, when you pray to the Buddha or any enlightened being, you're praying to someone who was once like you and who wants nothing more than for you to be like them. And you're asking not for them to change reality for you so much, but you're asking for them to help you cultivate your mind so that you can become free of the sufferings of the world and you can become Buddhas just like them. And so Buddhist prayer is a little bit different, but we do prayer in Buddhism. We pray to the Buddha who was once like us, and we pray for the capacity to be able to change our minds, to let go of our clinging and fixation, and to become Buddhas ourselves. And so the 7 branches of offering, which is how they're sometimes called, they sometimes call it the 7 branches of offering. These 7 branches help us to develop a virtuous mind state, which will help us transform our mind from confusion to wisdom. And so, briefly stated, the 7 branch prayer is a traditional format for practice. Paying homage is the first of the 7 branches. The second is presenting offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The third is, in the presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, acknowledging and confessing our negative actions. The fourth is rejoicing in the good that we and others do. The fifth is that we request the Buddhas and other spiritual teachers to teach and remain present in the world. The first is we ask them to teach, and the sixth one is that we ask them to remain present in the world. And the seventh is that we dedicate the merit, or we dedicate the virtue and goodness of the prayer to the accomplishment of all awakening for all beings. So we'll go over them one more time. Paying homage, presenting offerings, acknowledging and confessing negative actions, rejoicing in the good that we and others do, requesting spiritual teaching, asking that the Buddhas remain present in the world, and dedicating the virtue to the attainment of enlightenment by all beings. So these are the 7 branches. And I'm going to be talking about the 7 branches this time and the next time, to talk about how cultivating a virtuous mind counteracts confusion, counteracts negativity and grasping, and how it helps us to lighten our hearts and to lighten our minds and to gradually become wise beings ourselves. And many of you will be familiar with Buddhist prayers, like the sadhana of Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of Compassion. And in the sadhana of Chenrezig, there's a 7-branch prayer where they talk about these 7 things, one after the other. And they use Chenrezig as the focus for the prayer. They address all their prayers to Chenrezig, but you can address your 7 branches to all enlightened beings. And at the back of the Great Path of Awakening, in the very back of the book, there is a 7-branch prayer, and I'll read it for you now to give you an example. With complete faith, I bow to all the victorious ones, meaning the Buddhas, to all the victorious ones and their children who abide in the 10 directions and 3 times. I offer flowers, incense, light, perfume, food, music, and many other things, both in substance and with my imagination. I ask the noble assemblage to accept them. I confess all evil actions that I have done, influenced by my defilements, from time without beginning until now. The 5 that ripen immediately, the 10 non-virtuous acts, and many others. I rejoice in the merit of whatever virtue Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and ordinary people gather throughout the 3 times. I pray for the wheel of the Dharma to be turned, the teachings of the Mahayana and the Hinayana, in ways suitable for the different aptitudes and motivations present in sentient beings. I ask Buddhas not to pass into nirvana, but, with great compassion and until samsara is completely empty, to look after all sentient beings who drown in this ocean of sorrow. May whatever merit I have accumulated become a seed for the enlightenment of all beings. Without delay, may I become a splendid leader for sentient beings. So this is an example of a 7-branch prayer. And all of the 7-branch prayers that you see or read will be based upon this format. But I'd like to explain a little bit about the function of this. But before I do, I want to talk about the word accumulation. When we first start practicing the Buddha's teachings, we hear about the 2 accumulations, the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. And when we hear about the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom, we are not quite sure what they are or why we do them, but we know they're good because the Buddha said, do no harm, practice virtue, tame your mind. And so we know that somehow they're helpful in our transformation from being ordinary to being enlightened beings. So we know that, but what are they and why? And in one of the popular dedication prayers that many people recite, it says, may we accomplish the 2 accumulations, which, which dispel the 2 obstacles. And so this helps us to understand the function of the 2 accumulations. And so we as unenlightened beings are said to be obscured and to have obstacles and obscurations, or O and O, as I like to call them, obstacles and obscurations. In other words, the first thing is we don't know we have Buddha nature. That's our first obstacle and our first obscuration. We don't know that we have a mind that has the potential to know itself and to wake up to its own nature. We don't know that. And so we run around through this life that the Buddha called samsara, cyclic existence. We try to get things and lose them, and try to get away from things we don't want, and we come in contact with them. And so samsara is an ocean of suffering, basically, according to the teachings of the Buddha. And so caught in samsara, we're so busy trying to avoid negative things happening to us and gathering all the things we think we need, that we don't have time to even think about the possibility of having Buddha awakening and permanent happiness and wisdom within us. We don't have the time to look into that and to feel that. And so that's our first obstacle and obscuration. But the second one is mental affliction. And I don't think I need to explain mental affliction to anyone. It's what happens when we can't get what we want, or that we get something we don't want. So mental affliction is how we respond to our environment when we experience grasping and clinging. And this second of our obstacles and obscurations, the obstacle and obscuration of mental afflictions, and this basic obstacle of not knowing about our Buddha nature, we'll call it the cognitive obscuration. We don't know that our mind is Buddha. We have no idea. And we have mental affliction because we don't know our mind is Buddha. And so these two obstacles and obscurations, basic ignorance and mental affliction, are what keep samsara going. You could say that samsara, this ocean of suffering the Buddha talked about, is actually being manufactured moment to moment in our own minds all the time, because we don't know our mind's basic nature of goodness and wisdom. We don't know it. And only through the practice of meditation and compassion and love will we be able to discover that true nature of our mind. So the practices of the 7 branches help us. They help us to pacify and purify our mental afflictions and our cognitive obscuration of ignorance. So the 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom are the opposite of the 2 obscurations of ignorance and mental affliction. And so if we accumulate virtue and we accumulate wisdom, that will help us to dispel the obstacles and obscurations of mental afflictions and ignorance. So this is why the 7 branches are so helpful and useful to us. And so let's see, I'm checking the time to make sure I've got time. I do. So I'm going to spend another few minutes talking about the 7 branches. And I'll start by going back to good old footnote number 54 from The Great Path of Awakening. Each of the 7 branches actually has a function, and it transforms something. And so if we practice it this way, when we pay homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, when we pay homage, that counteracts our arrogance and pride. When we present offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, that counteracts greed. When we acknowledge and confess evil actions, that counteracts aggression. When we rejoice in the good that others do, that counteracts jealousy. Requesting spiritual teaching counteracts ignorance. Asking the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to remain present in the world, it counteracts the basic samsaric problem of believing in the permanence of all things that are actually impermanent. And dedicating the virtue to the welfare of others leads to the attainment of full awakening. So I'll review those again. Paying homage counteracts pride. Presenting offerings counteracts greed. Acknowledging and confessing our negative actions counteracts aggression. Rejoicing in the good that others do counteracts jealousy. Requesting spiritual teaching counteracts ignorance. Asking the Buddhas and teachers to remain present in the world counteracts the view of permanence. And dedicating virtue to the welfare of others leads to the attainment of full awakening. And so in this way, the 7 branches are not just something nice that we say. They're not just something, some kind of nice words that come out of our mouths. They're actually an aspiration for us to attain the highest good, which is Buddhahood. And when we make an aspiration, I remember His Eminence Taisi Rinpoche, when he was teaching a group of us once, he said, in Tibet, we have a saying, when you make an aspiration, he said, don't worry about practicality. So he says, just aim high, aim high, the highest possible aspirations you can make. And I can really see the virtue in that and the benefit in that, because right now we don't recognize that we have Buddha nature. We don't recognize that we have the capacity to become Buddhas. Instead, we experience our mind, which is the seat of our awakening, as being this little tiny self. We take the biggest, most giant thing in the whole world, which is our mind, which is completely open, limitless, and without material substance. I mean, mind has no color. It has no shape. It has no form. It has no location. It has no beginning. It has no end. The mind is completely limitless, completely limitless. And so the mind is completely limitless. And we take this giant, amazing thing that is not just an inert emptiness, but is suffused with clarity and wisdom. Suffused with clarity, luminosity, and wisdom. It has the capacity to know, K-N-O-W. It has the capacity to know. We take this huge thing, and Situ Rinpoche explained this to us. He says, we take this biggest thing in the world and we turn it into the smallest thing in the world, our self-concept. In fact, in one of Trungpa Rinpoche's books, he says, we misunderstand mind's emptiness. It's a little too much for us. And so we create this tiny self so we can feel safe. And we take this clarity, this intensity that we have that allows us to perceive and to think and to know. We take that quality of the mind and project it outward, thinking of it as a real world of external things and people. And so we take this amazing thing and we squeeze it down and take away its power by believing in permanence and believing in an external world that we somehow need to get hold of and to control. So this is why we stay busy in samsara all the time, because we are trying to get hold of something that you can't get hold of, and to make something permanent that's at its base impermanent. So in that way, we have to take action, skillful action, to counteract these erroneous beliefs. And believing in the presence of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is the first way to do that. So the first of the 7 branches is paying homage. So if we think about the whole idea of a Buddha, my teacher, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, when he first started teaching me, he must have known I had a Catholic girl past. And he said, oh, prayer should be one of your first practices. He did teach me to meditate, yes, but he said, prayer is important to you. And he said, whenever your mind is a little bit unsettled, he said, think of the Buddha and pray to the Buddha. And at first it was like one of those Zen Buddhist riddles, like what is the sound of one hand clapping and so on. What does that mean to think of the Buddha and pray to the Buddha? And so over time, I developed the concept that the Buddha really continued to exist. He didn't go out of existence when he died, which turns out to be the teaching. That is the teaching about the Buddha. And that as a being who remains in here in our world samsara, then we can actually think of him at any time and ask for him to be present in front of us. And in fact, if you read in the great prayer books, such as the Kagyu Monlam prayer book, or any prayer book, one of the first things you do is you ask and request for the Buddhas to be present in front of you. So you take this idea of enlightenment that is somewhat abstract, and you anchor it in the concept of a being who can be seen as being in front of you. And by conceiving of the Buddha in this way, you give rise to an acknowledgement. Maybe it's an unconscious acknowledgement or a silent acknowledgement that you too have Buddha potential, that you too have Buddha nature. So by conceiving that the Buddhas are there in front of you, all of them in their magnificence and glory, made of light and insubstantial, thinking of all of them being present in front of you is a way of relating to your Buddha nature, at first through the abstract idea that there is an enlightened being out there somewhere, and you can relate to that enlightened being. And so by doing that, we pay homage to the Buddhas and bow to the Buddhas. And in a way, we're bowing to the Buddha that's within us. And we're paying homage to our own potential, which we have seen realized in the lives of the great masters, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And so by paying homage at the beginning, we're acknowledging our own Buddha nature, as well as our aspiration to someday overcome our ignorance and overcome our mental afflictions, those two obscurations, ignorance and mental affliction. And so we're saying, I'm going for it. I want to be like the Buddha. And so thinking of them, we pay homage to them. And then after that, we present offerings to them. We make offerings. We can make offerings like these on the shrine. I have 7 bowls of water, which stand in for the 7 or 8, if you count the lamp, the 8 gifts that would traditionally be given to a guest in a household in ancient India. Water for drinking, water for washing, flowers, incense, lamps, perfume, food, and music. And in other words, the guest would get the royal treatment. And so we offer all those same things to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and each one of them has a significance that we won't go into today. But the second is that we make offerings. So we don't just pay homage to the Buddhas, we practice a form of offering. We practice a form of giving, which is, in a way, it's a great way to counteract our clinging and fixation. Part of the reason that I offer water is because it's easy to clean up for, but at the end of every day when you take the offerings down. But the other is that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, my teacher, told me that offering water is great because he said you can't get puffed up about making a water offering. You can imagine that water offering to be anything, but you don't have to worry about it being so grand that you would say, I made the best offering of water, because water is water. So by making these offerings, we interact with the Buddha in a tangible way. And then we also, in the presence of the Buddha, we think about our negative actions, and we think of and regret them as a way of counteracting the potential for those to arise again. And so that's why we practice thinking about and confessing our evil actions to the Buddha, because, I mean, who else is better suited than the Buddha? Who's better suited than the Buddha to be the witness for our confession? And then we rejoice in the good that others do. And by rejoicing in the good that we and others do, it's a way of balancing ourselves out. Because often we only think of the bad things we do. So why not also think of the good things we do and emphasize those as well? And then the next thing we ask in the 7 branches is we request teaching. Now that the Buddhas are here, may they give us the teachings that will bring about our awakening. And then we ask them to remain present with us. And in asking them to remain present, we say, stay with us until we achieve Buddhahood ourselves. And then at the conclusion of this, we dedicate all of the goodness. In a way, we sort of wrap it all up and tie it with a bow by saying, I am not going to keep this accumulation of merit and wisdom. I'm not even going to keep that for myself. Instead, I'm going to offer it and give it away to all sentient beings. And this, in a way, seals our virtue and makes it permanent. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, when we offer things, we're still unenlightened beings. And so we might actually have some jealousy in our mind when we make an offering, thinking, oh, I'm going to give a better offering than someone else, or this or that. Or we might feel self-conscious in a positive way or a negative way. And he said, so even our offerings are a little confused. They have a taint of confusion and clinging to them. But when we dedicate them, he said, we make them pure by saying, may my offering this be like the offering of the great bodhisattvas who are free from clinging and full of wisdom. May my offering become like theirs, vast and uncountable. Now, you hear that? Vast and uncountable, vast and unquantifiable. And so what this means is that our offerings are like our minds. We make offerings in a way that it echoes how our minds are, that our minds are vast and full of possibility. And so our offerings are also vast and full of possibility. So by making these offerings in this way, with this vastness in mind, then we can actually begin to break through the barriers that we place on our mind and life by thinking of ourselves as just little old me and just little old things. So in this way, dedication purifies any mistakes we may have made in our offering and also expands our offering to fill all of our being. So that's a little bit in general about the 7 branches and how those 7 branches begin to saturate our mind with virtue. I'm going to say 1 or 2 more things, but then I'm going to set up the next part of my teaching on the 7 branches and virtue by showing you this book, The Words of My Perfect Teacher, which was written by the great Nyingma Master and Paltra Rinpoche. And he does an extensive teaching on the 7 branches in this book, and I'm going to be sharing some of his wisdom starting in my next talk. I might have a little time yet today. I can share a couple things about homage, paying homage. So I think I'll have a little time for that. But I wanted to say one more thing about virtue before I go to Paltra Rinpoche. The virtuous mind is the mind that is giving and loving and kind and is open and non-grasping. And so if we are always right now caught in egoistic grasping of one kind or another, we're sort of training ourselves in the causes of suffering. Whereas if we're kind and good and ethical and we practice not harming beings, we're actually beginning to condition our minds with goodness. And it actually changes how we experience ourselves and the rest of the world. Yesterday, I was part of the Nundro retreat that Lama Tom did, and one of the attendees at the retreat talked about her own personal experience of making offerings, and that she was practicing something that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche had taught us many years ago, which was that we don't just have to limit our offerings to our 7 branch prayers or our practice on our meditation seats, that we can actually practice virtue wherever we are by making mental offerings of everything we experience and see. So if we see a beautiful sky or beautiful flowers, we can mentally offer that beautiful sky and those beautiful flowers to the benefit of all beings. In other words, we take the mindfulness we develop in shamatha to become aware of our surroundings and to become aware of how our surroundings could turn into offerings. We can mentally offer the plate of food that was just put in front of us. That's the Buddhist version of saying grace. We think about the plate of food that has come to us, and we offer it to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for the benefit of beings. And in fact, Khenpo Rinpoche said that whenever you get something new, if someone buys you a gift, or you go to the store and buy yourself something, like maybe you buy yourself a new phone, or maybe like I did a few weeks ago, you buy yourself a new meditation gong, whatever it is that you buy or get for yourself, he said you could actually first imagine that all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are in front of you, and imagine that you mentally offer this wonderful thing you've just obtained. Okay, maybe it came in a box from Amazon, but you make a mental offering of it to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for the benefit of beings. He says, and then you imagine that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas give it back to you, that they give back this object to you so that you can use it for yourself. I just loved this teaching. And the woman who shared yesterday in the Nundro class said it had helped her also, because it gave her something to do with her everyday experience. She didn't just have to make offerings while she was on her practice seat. She was able to make offerings just walking through her everyday life. And this is something that all of us can do. And I'm going to encourage you this week to see, for your homework, to go through your day and see how many opportunities for offering you actually have. The more you think about the presence of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in your life, the more they will be present for you, and the more your own Buddha nature will be cultivated. An awareness of your Buddha nature will be cultivated. So this is sort of the secret agenda behind teaching the practice of goodness and virtue. And by the way, you can also practice virtue by making the aspiration that you are of benefit to every being you meet. Now, you might say, I don't know how to help everybody that I meet. And in fact, sometimes I am catastrophically bad at helping the people that I meet. But if you mentally hold the wish to be of benefit to others, even if you can't benefit them, they will feel your sincerity, because human beings are sensitive. We know when someone is being sincere with us, and we know when someone is doing something self-centered to serve themselves and to just maybe placate or manipulate us. So when we sincerely wish to benefit people we encounter, with luck, they will experience that, even if we don't benefit them directly. So in any case, the 7 branch offering. So I'm going to go back to the 7 branches of offering. And we have a couple more minutes, so I'm just going to start by talking about the antidote to pride, which is paying homage to the Buddhas. He said that you can do this by bowing or prostrating to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He said, for this practice, he said, you can visualize or emanate 100, then 1,000, then innumerable bodies like your own, as numerous as the particles of dust in the universe. At the same time, you visualize that all beings, as infinite as space itself, are bowing or prostrating along with you. You imagine that all the Buddhas are present in front of you, and then you imagine that you emanate millions and billions of yourself, and that those millions and billions of you join with the millions and billions of beings, and all of you together bow toward the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and offer them homage. You praise their quality, and by praising their quality, those same qualities within us are awakened and grow. And so what's interesting is that by imagining millions and billions of ourselves, we're making our offering like our mind, limitless and clear. And so by doing this and bowing to the Buddhas, this counteracts our pride. And by counteracting our pride, we counteract, I guess what you could say is the most stubborn stain of mental affliction that we have is the secret sense of superiority that we feel toward others. I mean, whenever we criticize someone, we're basically saying we're better than them. We're thinking it, even if we're not saying it. And when we think competitively of others, we're basically thinking we're superior and why do they get what we want, and so on and so forth. And so this is a way of counteracting all of those kinds of feelings. And so the next time we talk, I see we're coming down to the bottom of our time together, but he says you can actually also physically bow. And then he gives detailed instructions about how to place your hands together at forehead, throat, and heart and bow toward the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He quotes from the Sutra of Great Liberation saying, I join my hands above my head like an opening lotus bud. With countless bodies amassed in clouds, I prostrate to the Buddhas of the 10 directions. And then the other quote he has is, make a sign of reverence at your heart, your body bending low without distraction, your hands as though they cupped a flower bud and held together like a relic case. And so he's describing this motion where the hands are cupped. And it's as though you're holding a lotus bud in your hands. The hands are not pressed flat against each other, but have this space. And the space, in a way, is a space to hold our goodness. And we can offer our goodness in this way by touching our forehead, thinking that we offer our body to the Buddha, touching our throat, thinking we offer our speech to the Buddha, touching our heart, thinking that we offer our minds to the Buddha. A being is their body, their speech, and their mind that composes the parts of a being. And so we're offering in this way symbolically our entire being, nothing left out, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Then if we are able to move forward onto the ground and place our foreheads on the floor, fantastic. But if you're like me and kind of creaky, you will bow from the waist and in that way bow to the Buddhas. And it helps to counteract our pride. And then he tells the story of the great yogi Jetsun Milarepa, who went to the Lama Ngokpa for teachings. It says he arrived while the Lama was teaching. And Milarepa paid his respects by doing prostrations from afar, from outside the assembly, and the Lama was delighted. Taking off his ceremonial headdress, he prostrated to Milarepa in return, saying, what an auspicious interruption. That person doing prostrations over there is doing it in the style of the disciples of Marpa of Lodrok. Ask him who he is. And then Patrul Rinpoche says that anyone who follows a teacher and receives the teachings ought to be like a piece of cloth dipped in color dye. As the person learns to emulate the actions of their respected master, there should be some noticeable change in how they were from how they were before. When a piece of cloth is dyed, it takes the new color more or less successfully. But how can it fail to change color at all? He said, then he says, it is wonderful to be able to practice under your teacher and to become like your teacher. And so in any case, then he gives little warnings about how not to become stiff with pride because you follow a specific teacher and so on. And so he says, and as part of Patrul Rinpoche's works are always full of warnings. Do not surround yourself with disciples who have strayed into just talking about the teaching and not practicing, but whose minds have become impervious to the teachings. Do not associate with compassion who set limits to their promises to benefit beings. And There's a Tibetan proverb that says, all actions are only imitation. Those act best who imitate the best. So in any way, and then the Buddha is said to have said about the bow, a single prostration is so powerful that if, as a result, one were to become a universal emperor, as many times as the number of grains of dust beneath one's body, down to the lowest depths of the earth, the benefits of that act would still not be exhausted. In other words, a person who bows toward the Buddha with great homage and respect not only counteracts their own egotism, they actually begin to accumulate great qualities. So this is all we can talk about today. This is all we can cover today. But the next time we get together, I'll share other teachings from Paltar Rinpoche about the 7 branches of offering and how we can continue to practice virtue in our everyday life. And I hope that you will have a wonderful, great week. And let's take a moment to dedicate the goodness of our session today. I will recite a short prayer in English. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Okay, thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day.